This concludes our chanting service, so if you could please hand your books to the outside aisle and we'll pick them up. The Sangha is invited to return to our breathing so that our collective energy of mindfulness will bring us together as an organism, going as a river with no more separation. Let the whole Sangha breathe as one body, be free as one body, generate peace as one body. Let us transcend the boundaries of the delusive self, liberating from the superiority complex, the inferiority complex, and the equality complex.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Angie, and happy to see so many of you here in the hall this Memorial Day weekend. Is there anyone here who is new for the first time today? Welcome. Happy to have you with us. Bill, how many do we have on Zoom this morning?
60.
Okay, so welcome everyone on Zoom as well. This morning, I'd like to talk about mistaken identity. Sounds very mysterious. But first, we'll have a few announcements. Programs coming up in the next month or so. We've got a half day of mindfulness here on Saturday morning, June 15th. John McCarris is going to talk about radical acceptance, how to accept ourselves fully. I will be here in the hall with David teaching Qigong, Maria Teresa for a weekend in July. It's a residential retreat called Cultivating the Courageous Heart, and it's a weekend of loving kindness practice and Qigong. So please join us here if you'd like that practice. We have actually meditation every morning during the week at 7 a.m. here in the hall and online. On Thursday, we have extended meditation. Fred will be here giving interviews this week. David's here for Qigong on Wednesdays. And we're also offering yoga now. We're kind of in the middle of a transition on that. There won't be yoga this week or next, but then we'll resume on Monday nights. Everyone's welcome on June 10th. We have a 7-day retreat starting a week, well, actually next Saturday afternoon. And so we will have Sangha on Sunday in here, so please come. Chris Lee Nunn from Fort Myers, who's always very fresh and original with his sharing of the Dharma, will be here to give the talk. But the following week, that week of, I guess, June 2nd through the 9th, we won't have any morning meditation, evening meditation, Qigong, or yoga that week because the campus will essentially be closed for the retreat. We have Wake Up, which is a mindfulness and meditation group for people in their 20s and 30s. That meets every 2 weeks on Friday nights, and their next meeting is this Friday night, May 31st. We have a lot of selfless service in the community to support our center and programs, and we have a newsletter that comes out every Tuesday that'll give you lots of areas of opportunity. We could use right now more people to help in the kitchen, so you can contact Brian to learn more about that. And then finally, the FCM library, which is in the education building right next door, will be open after Sangha today until about 1. Members can check out books, and everyone else can just browse and read. So all of this information, there's a lot going on, can be found on our website, on the calendar, or again, Tuesday's Mindfulness Matters newsletter has it all. So I'd like to begin this morning with an invitation to just close your eyes for a few moments and ask yourself, what brings me here? Not just here to this hall or online this morning, but what's brought me to a spiritual path? What brings me to these teachings? What was it in my life that actually drew me here? Chances are that most of us were drawn because there's something in our life that we want to change. So just think for yourself. Was it something I wanted to get rid of? Sometimes there's anxiety, dissatisfaction, confusion. Sometimes we're seeking something more meaningful in our lives. Maybe a feeling that there's something more than what we're experiencing in everyday life. What really drew me to this path? And for most of us, unless it's your roommate or your partner or somebody just kind of took a hook and dragged you in here this morning, it's often that there's some kind of suffering. It can be a strong suffering, some kind of a heartache or an anxiety, or it could be just a yearning, something, just a longing for something that seems to be missing. So whatever it is, we come because we're looking to maybe to heal, to learn, to grow. And the Buddha called that suffering. So if your eyes are closed, I invite you to open them now. But we shared this suffering. We shared it with a great being whose name was Siddhartha Gautama, who later became known as the Buddha. And he lived, as Fred talked about, in his wonderful recounting last Sunday for Vesak Day, where we celebrated the Buddha's birthday. Even though the Buddha lived in this palace, surrounded by everything he could want, something was missing, and he still saw suffering. He saw sickness, old age, death. He saw people trying really hard to have happiness, and then it just slipping out of their fingers. And he said, something's wrong. What's causing this suffering? He really wanted to know what's causing suffering, and is there some kind of a remedy for suffering? So with that, he left the palace, took off, wandered for 6 years, and had some interesting experiences. He did a lot of meditation, a lot of practices. He even went through a period of asceticism where he and 5 other companions just had a severe self-discipline, renounced almost every indulgence of life. They were barely eating, and he was actually on the brink of death. And the story has it that a young girl from the village came and brought him rice milk, and it brought him back to life, and he realized this is not the path. This is not what it is. And so he went and he sat beneath the Bodhi tree, and he just looked into his own mind. And by this time, because he had meditated, he had learned to calm and stabilize his mind, he was able to look into his mind and see very clearly that he was suffering from a sense of false identity. That there was actually, he had been acting, and all people being acting as if there's a self. And when he looked in the mind, there was nothing there. And he realized that this whole life, all the clinging and the aversion, the confusion, was built on this false foundation that there's some little Siddhartha inside, kind of pulling the strings that has to be protected and aggrandized. And he realized there's nothing there, it's just awareness. And it was totally liberating for him, because rather than being at the beck and call of like this little puppet on our shoulder or wherever we might imagine it to be, he realized that, all these thoughts, these worries, everything that arose, it's all just transitory. There's nothing solid there. The only thing that stays is the awareness of what's happening. All the rest of the stuff is just passing through, a little bit like we were playing with in meditation. And if we stop and just watch, we realize that thoughts come and go, sensations come and go, our mood changes, but there's always an awareness. That's the one thing that's always there, is awareness. So he was pretty excited about that. He was pretty blissful. But then he thought, nobody else will get it. That just, it had been so hard for him to see it until he finally looked. But then somehow he had this realization that there are some people out there where the dust on their eyelids is very light, meaning that, they're not just seeing the dust, but they could see through that with some teaching, and they could wake up to their true nature, to this awareness that they are, instead of identifying with their thoughts and everything else that comes up. So he decided to teach, and he went out and he found those 5 ascetics that they had actually left him. They sort of wrote him off as a loser when he started eating again. It's like, he's not serious, we're leaving. So they went on to this place called Deer Park, and he decided he'd go find them. And when they first saw him, they were kind of suspicious, like, here comes this guy. But then they realized there was just this glow about him. And he sat and he taught them basically his first teaching, that there is suffering, the cause of suffering, this misidentification, this belief in this self, and that there is a way out of suffering by seeing clearly and shifting that attention from, all the things that distract us to this awareness. And so this theme of kind of dust being sort of the transitory things of our mind was important in his teachings. And one of his early teachings that's particularly popular in Mahayana Buddhism is the Sarangama Sutra. A sutra just means they are purported to be the words of the Buddha teaching. And in the Sarangama Sutra, the Buddha is teaching to that group of ascetics. He's talking to one in particular, Ajnata, and also a whole assembly of monks. And he uses this metaphor of the dust, but also uses a metaphor that I really want to focus on today of what he called host and guest, to help them see how we mistakenly identify with the objects of the mind instead of the mind itself. And so in this sutra, he was talking and relaying his awakening, and he said, "After my awakening, I went to the Deer Park, where, for Ajnata's sake and the other 4 monks, I said that beings have not become fully awake because they're confused by afflictions that are like visitors and like dust." And then he asked them, "What in particular at that time caused the 5 of you to awaken and become sages?" Then Ajnata stood up and said respectfully to the Buddha, "Of all the elders here in this grand assembly, I was the one who was given the name Ajnata, meaning one who understands, because I had come to realize what visitor and dust signify. It was in this way that I became a sage." And then Ajnata said, world-honored one, which is what they call the Buddha, world-honored one, suppose a visitor stops at an inn for a night or for a meal. Once his stay is ended, or the meal is finished, he packs his bags and goes on his way. He's not at leisure to remain, but if he were the innkeeper, he would not leave. By considering this example of the visitor, the one who comes and goes, and the innkeeper, or the host, the one who remains, I understand what the visitor signifies. He represents transience. So this teaching, this metaphor of host and guests came up in another teaching recently, and I had forgotten. Fred's given some wonderful teachings on this, and I had forgotten just how important and how clear this teaching can be. Even if you've walked in here for the first time today and you've never heard any of these teachings, it's probably particularly clear for you to hear this, and for all of us who have been practicing, to understand the difference between the host and the guest. There was a very famous Chan master, and Chan just means Zen in China, Chan Master Hsu Yun, who actually lived 120 years. He was born in 1840 and he lived till, I think, 1959. And during that time, he saw much turmoil in China, much change. He gave many, many, many teachings. But as he told his monks, he said, I think the most important teaching for everyone to initially have is host and guest. You really need to understand this distinction. It'll clear up a lot of misconceptions. And so today I want to dwell on that a bit. And, we start off by just getting an intellectual understanding, which seems pretty simple. And nothing I say will surprise you, I'm sure. Like, yeah, that's logical, of course. And it's fine to start with that intellectual understanding. But over time, our practice, we're on a spiritual path because we want to really realize that understanding. So we'll talk towards the end of the talk a little bit about how do we practice to make that really realized within us. So again, the Buddha is using the metaphor of an inn. So you can think of a hotel and a B&B wherever, where visitors are coming and going all the time, right? Some people show up for, in those days at an inn, you might just stop and have a meal, or you might spend the night. Today we might spend a night, we might spend a couple nights, we might spend a couple weeks. So some visitors stay longer than others, but eventually, hopefully they all leave. And when they leave, there's no trace of them. The rooms are cleaned, the guests are gone, but the host stays. The host is always there. So what are the visitors? The visitors are everything that appears and disappears. So think about your mind, your feelings, your emotions. Even though some of them may seem to stay longer than others, we're all a little different in terms of what emotions we've kind of nourished over time. Some people have a tendency towards anxiety, some towards worry, but they're not here 100% of the time, those guests. They come and they go. Happiness comes and goes, so it's not just unwanted guests, but focusing first on some of those difficult guests, their feelings, emotions, thoughts, ideas, and then more complex combinations of those guests, like your beliefs, which can be made up of lots of ideas and experience and memories, your dramas, your opinions, your roles. We all have roles that we play, that we see ourselves in. We're a child, and then we're a parent. We're a boss, an employee. It could be a neighbor. Some people's role is as a victim. We have these ways that we see ourselves, and sometimes those roles feel really solid. Like, those are guests that are always here, but they change. I've certainly noticed this as a mother. You have a baby, and, most of us are so happy to have a young child and have a baby, and it was very important to many of us to be a good mother and read all the books and take good care and make sure our child had a good education and it was healthy and was fed properly. And then we started giving them advice. We raise them and guide them. And when they're teenagers, we're still giving them advice, even though they're not listening so much to us. And then at some point, the children leave home, right? They go to college. And then perhaps they come back and they're starting to give us advice. And at some point, I watched this in my own relationship with my son who turned 40 2 days ago, gasp. I'll always sort of think of myself as the mother, but he gives me a lot of advice these days. And those roles, they change, right? There's nothing permanent in those roles. And then as our parents age, I feel like with my mother who's 92, I feel much more like the mother in that role. And it can be hard for us sometimes if we think that those guests, those roles are solid when they start to change. We don't see that they're transient, they're impermanent. So there's a lot that's passing through in the mind, and if we cling to these guests, to these beliefs, to these emotions, to our thoughts about things, we suffer, because things change. And sometimes our thoughts aren't skillful, or we're hanging on to an old grudge. We're just trying to keep those guests here, and it's not creating happiness. We're not seeing that there's nothing, I say nothing real. It doesn't mean that things don't appear, but there's nothing inherently permanent and unchangeable about any of these guests. Even our bodies, right? They're not like they used to be, right, 20 years ago. Our bodies are changing all the time. They'll grow old, sick, they'll die eventually. And if we think they're permanent, if we think they shouldn't change, if that's what we're identified with, then we're going to suffer when it does change. So our bodies, everybody's bodies, even mountains, we know they are eroding over time. This earth, it'll be a few billion more years, perhaps. But everything is subject to change. The one thing in our experience that's not changing is the host, but we'll come back to the host, and that's this awareness. So some of these visitors are welcome, they're kind. It's nice to have loving kindness visit the mind, compassion, mindfulness, gratitude. There are guests that are kind, that are welcome, that bring us happiness, that perhaps give us a feeling of oneness with others. And those guests will come and go too. But those are the types of guests that we're happy to have. And then there are guests that are unruly, that knock over the furniture, that swing from the chandeliers, that eat up all the food. And those are these crazy, these judgmental thoughts that we have of ourselves, of other people that are critical, dissatisfaction, boredom, all kinds of things that come up in the mind that really are disruptive and disturbing. They make a mess. So lots of different types of guests. And it's interesting, the guests that are not very skillful, particularly a lot of our thoughts, if we don't stop and pay attention, we realize that those guests are basically running the inn. It's not the host. The other day I finished doing something around the house. Maybe I was cleaning or something. And one of the guests in my mind said, "Go get some ice cream." and I almost started to get in the car, and I thought, wait a minute, who's in charge here? It's the guest is telling us all the time, do this, don't do that, move, get a different job. Sometimes the advice is good, but a lot of times, go find your soulmate. Get rid of the person you thought was your soulmate, but they're not your soulmate. It's just this constant preferences and likes and dislikes. It's like a petty tyrant in the mind sometimes, these guests. So we want to start paying attention, and we don't have to go kick them all out, but we don't have to let them overrun the yin. We don't have to let them overrun the mind. We can recognize them for what they are. So let's stop for a moment and again just reflect, just closing your eyes. And we've talked about, thoughts, emotions, feelings, the types of things that come up in the mind, stories, beliefs, maybe ideas about status, reputation. Think about your own guests. What types of guests do you tend to, maybe indulge or just have? What are your frequent guests in your mind? If you think about what occupies your mind a lot, what are some of the types of guests that seem to show up a lot? So opening your eyes, and perhaps you're familiar with these guests, or maybe you haven't really paid them much attention. David, I'll put you on the spot. What are some of the guests that show up in David's mind?
Anxiety about the future.
Anxiety about.
Yeah.
Anybody else have that guest? Anxiety about the future that shows up? Yeah. What are the guests? What are some of the guests that show up a lot that you're in your mind?
Self-criticism.
Pardon?
Self-criticism.
Self-criticism, yeah. What else? Just call them out.
Perfectionist.
Perfectionist. Election. Certain things we dwell on. What else?
Wanting to be superior.
Wanting to be superior, yeah.
Fear of money.
Fear of money.
Need to protect.
Need to protect.
Not feeling good enough.
Not feeling good enough.
Frustration.
Frustration. Yeah, and what's interesting with pretty much all these types of guests that we're mentioning, they all are relating to one person, right? Me, or you in your case. It's this sense that in the arising of thought, there's just a sense with these things that arise when we identify with the frustration, the wanting to be superior, to be protected, whatever it is, the anxiety. Rather than just sitting back as awareness, as the host, and noticing these guests are passing through, they cause suffering because we're identifying with them as who we are. The anxiety, whatever it is, it's as if there's a self there, there's something solid. And that's what we call in Buddhist psychology the egoic self. That's its job, is to protect itself and make itself feel real. Because guess what? It isn't. And when we let go when we shift our attention, as we'll talk about, from always focusing on these guests to focusing on the host, the awareness, the innkeeper, where this is all passing through, we realize there's nothing real in these guests, and they start to lose their hold on us. But until we make that shift, if we're always seduced by the thoughts, the fears, the beliefs, we're caught up in that feeling that there is something solid here, and boy, I better take care of it. So that's the suffering that the Buddha found. It makes us cling to things, to be grasping all the time. It makes us avert, to try to push away what we don't want. What makes this self stronger? It's very, very busy, trying to take care of that self. Some of these guests, the ones that get the most attention, they tend to manifest over time like our personality. I'm an anxious person. I'm an angry person. I'm a mother. Whatever it is, I'm a very clever person. I'm a funny person. I'm a professional consultant or a scientist or a teacher. It's almost like they're costumes that we wear. So we put on these costumes, and sometimes they're helpful. It's helpful when you have a small, helpless child to wear the costume of a mother. It's helpful when you go to your job that you have sort of the costume, the role of the employee, that you don't just do whatever you want, say whatever you want, but you're part of a team. There's usually a mission. So some of these costumes are actually very helpful. But when our attention is so focused on the guest or the costume, we start to think that's who we are. I really am Batman, or I really am whoever's costume I have on. And we forget, this is just a costume that I can put on and take off. I don't have to be defined by the costume, by the guest that's showing up. So perhaps one place where a lot of us can identify with these guests that come and go, particularly in terms of the roles we play. Think about Thanksgiving with your family. And, we leave home, we go out into the world, and then we go back home and we sit at the family at the big table perhaps, and suddenly we often have these feelings of, perhaps resistance with our parents, or something comes up with the sister that's very, very old. And suddenly, instead of being the competent adults that we are, we're sort of the child again. We're kind of in these dynamics that we've been in before. So, again, just interesting to take a look and notice how changeable these guests are, and how what seems to be who we are, it's just a costume. It's just something temporary. So in a spiritual path, we want to begin to turn our attention to the host. So the host at the end doesn't come and go. The host stays. And the host, ideally, is calm, relaxed, is able to entertain all types of guests that come. The host doesn't get ruffled. And so when we stop and we look into our own minds, and maybe you got just a little taste of that perhaps this morning with meditation, when we stop, we can notice that even though we're aware of sounds and sensations and thoughts, we're also aware that we're aware. There's this awareness itself that we are. We can't really, thinking about it is not helpful. We just stop and shift our attention. It's a very simple shift from looking at the guest all the time to just shifting to being that awareness, to just noticing, aware of hearing the voice right now. This awareness is with you right now. You're always aware. Perhaps aware that thoughts are coming and going right now, right? Just aware. And with that awareness, we might touch it ever so briefly at first, but on a spiritual path, we begin to look into the mind and touch that awareness that we are much more deeply and for more and more time. And we find that it's a place that it's spacious. It's like having a huge inn. You can have an unlimited number of guests. When we really touch into that awareness, it can hold sorrow. It can hold joy. It can hold silliness. It can hold play. It can hold anger. It can hold whatever is coming through because it's spacious, it's still, it's quiet. And that doesn't mean your mind is quiet. The mind, within this awareness, there can be all kinds of racket going on. There can be thoughts coming up. But if we're not just focused on the thoughts and think that's who we are, if we shift and know, oh, aware that thoughts have arisen, aware that the mind is busy. It's a very different feeling tone. It's a feeling tone of everything's okay. Oh, look, mind is busy thinking, or sounds are arising, or there's emotions arising. But we're not identified with what's arising. We're identified as the host with that which is aware of what's going on. So this is a very profound teaching that, again, I think intellectually we can see that metaphor of an inn and the host and the guest, and maybe begin to have some slight experience of that, but it's a deep practice, and we'll talk about practice in just a few minutes. Making that shift of attention, from guest to host, is really what our spiritual path is about. And again, the good news is you don't have to make the guest leave. I don't know, a lot of us are probably set in meditation and thoughts keep coming up and you're just like, if I just bear down, I'm just not going to let these thoughts come up. We don't have to approach it that way. We don't have to lock the doors. We don't have to go to the top of a mountain and lock all the guests out or run away from them. We can be right in the world. We just don't identify with them. So when we're sitting in meditation, and in meditation, like this morning, we're really using a guest in a sense to anchor the mind. The breath is a guest. It comes and goes, right? But when we're newer to meditation or even more experienced, we need that anchor. We need to initially just be able to calm the mind down so we can see what's going on. So we can use another guest, like the breath, or sometimes people use sound, or they might look at an object like a flower or a Buddha. We use some other object, some other guest that's kind of still, as opposed to our thoughts, to just lightly anchor the mind so we're not constantly moving into thought. So that's just really important. But at the same time, when you're meditating, thoughts are still popping up, stories. The next thing you know, it's like, what am I having for lunch today? What do I have on my to-do list? Oh, tomorrow's a holiday. I don't know. Anyway, whatever's happening. And then you realize, I've been lost in thought for the last 5 minutes, and that's okay. This is a practice. We're training the mind. So you bring the attention back again, and you may be aware. Somebody's clearing their throat, someone's coughing, thoughts are coming and going. And again, it's kind of like that's in the background, but your foreground, your attention is on the breath or this other object, because we're trying to train the mind to not chase the guest all the time. And the biggest guest that we chase is really our thoughts. So it's a very simple training. Eckhart Tolle talks about, sort of like a vertical axis, and down at the bottom of it is somebody he says is totally delusional. They're totally lost in their thoughts. They're totally identified with their thoughts all the time. And then at the upper end is someone who's awake, who uses thought when it's helpful, uses it to figure out, which way shall I drive home? Or how shall I plan for retirement? But they're not picking up thoughts for no reason. Like, when is it useful to think? And otherwise, the mind is clear and aware. And most of us are somewhere in between. So we're training on a spiritual path to move toward that place where the mind is just not pulled off center by constant thinking and beliefs and dramas and all the things that go with it. How about another bell? So if this awareness, this host, if it's so spacious and easeful, you think, well, why don't we just rest there? Why am I caught in my thoughts all the time? The thoughts are seductive. They're telling us, listen to me. If you don't listen to me, you're not going to figure out the job you need to get or the relationship you need to get or whatever else. We're constantly listening to the thoughts telling us, again, what we need to be doing, how we'll be lost without them. And in a sense, that's the ego. And again, it doesn't mean thoughts aren't sometimes helpful, but we're just seduced by them almost all the time. So how do we practice with that? And I just want to lay out a few practices because I think the concept's pretty straightforward, right? Host and guest. The guests come and go, the host stays. The host is awareness that's always here. The guests are the thoughts, the stories. Is that clear? The host and guest? So intellectually, it's pretty simple, right? And then we leave the hall and, we're following the guest around again before we know it, or maybe not so much. So it's simple, as I often say, it's simple but not easy. So how do we practice with it? That's what the spiritual path is all about. How do we make the host and guest, realized in our minds? And so we're fortunate here. I think it's just, Fred has laid out a beautiful, clear, 3-stage path for us to practice to make that transformation from guest to host here at FCM. And there are lots of different practices. I'm just going to mention some, but the encouragement really is to wherever you are on the path, to find what practices are meaningful for you where you are right now. As an example, the retreat that starts next Saturday is a 7-day wisdom retreat. It is for students who've learned to stabilize their mind, and they're going to be this might sound kind of frightening to some of you, spending a week looking into their minds, like what is the nature? And I'd say most of the people coming have had some glimpses, maybe just sitting in meditation and realizing, oh, awareness is always here. But I want to touch into that more deeply. I want to have it to be more accessible. So we have these different programs that help us along the way. Where we all start and need to continue to come back to always is building the muscle of mindfulness. A lot of times we don't even pay attention to what's going on in the mind. We're sort of on autopilot. We're reactive. We think the way we see the world is the way it is. Doesn't everybody see it this way? We think our preferences are the way things should be. It doesn't really matter, what the other 8 billion people think. We know how the world should turn. We don't see the reactivity. Oftentimes we don't see that the mind has got a little irritation. Someone's, how you doing? Fine, but it starts to sort of kindle. And next thing you know, there's some anger there or some frustration or disappointment, and we don't even see that's happening in our minds. So first we start off by practicing mindfulness, learning some of the basic ways of just noticing, how do I recognize thoughts? Even the nature of thoughts, they come and go. A thought's a funny thing. They have such power over us, but if you ever watch your mind and watch what a thought is, if you just watch it and you don't get lost in the content, it's just this little blip of energy. It's like, poof. And then you can't even remember what it was. You're just looking at it and it just disappears. We usually can't even see it arise. It happens so quickly. But we try to look and watch that thought. And Fred will say, show me your thoughts. I can't, they just disappeared. And so it's really kind of interesting when we start to learn mindfulness to realize, oh yeah, talk about a guess that comes quickly if I don't hang on to it, a thought. Gone. So we turn on that light of mindfulness to see what's going on. And then we start to meditate. And as I said before, this practice of meditation is really important. And it's not because you're trying to get to an altered state. None of this is about an altered state. Like suddenly you recognize your awareness and you're like floating or levitating in the air. This is not the Buddhist way. Awareness, it's our natural mind. It's just the mind without all the fabrication of thoughts that's going on, without the identification. So meditation helps us kind of start clearing through that fog of thought to stop following it, because it's just, we're so trained, follow thought, follow thought. No matter what it is, it's important. What I'm going to cook, what she said to me, it's just on and on and on and on. So with meditation, we bring an object in, and whether it's 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, we're training in bringing the mind back to the object. And eventually we can let go of the object and just rest in awareness. But initially, and oftentimes if the mind's busy, it's just very helpful, have the anchor of the breath and train the mind. So that's where we all need to start, is turn the light of mindfulness on and begin through meditation to train the mind to not chase the guest. And then we want to start to recognize the host. And you don't have to be an advanced meditator to do that, but just play with that. Like this morning when I said, and David was saying it, be aware that we're walking. Just be aware, he said. Be aware, practice, rather than always kind of chasing after the sound of the bell or the words, relaxing the mind and just receiving, just being aware of sounds coming and going without attaching, just aware of thought, and then aware that you're aware. And that's the tricky part, aware that you're aware. That always tripped me up. What does that mean? Then you start trying to think about it. Think about being aware that you're aware, and guess where you're going? Down the road with the guest. So you just realize, there's awareness here. And you just rest. Don't think, just relax the mind. There's nothing to do. Just relax the mind. Maybe a sound appears. Again, not following it, just aware. So just playing with that a little bit every day, and maybe playing with it during the day a little bit too. Again, Eckhart Tolle says that no matter how important it is to use thoughts in what we do during the day, you may be someone who, for your job, has to do a lot of thinking, but he said stop. Stop every few minutes. No one has to know you're doing it, but stop and just come back to being aware. We need to get used to making that shift, that we're not always in thought. We're changing that habit of shifting from attention to the guest to just being aware, to resting as the host. So those are very simple things that we can do that will help kind of us eventually make that shift. And then again, to go more deeply with that, working with a teacher is key. I can't tell you how many people, sometimes in 15-minute interviews that he has with members on the phone, sometimes downstairs on Thursday nights, people come on solitary retreats, they're on group retreats, but Fred has the ability to sit across from us and just ask the questions and just pull you out, because we go in for interviews with all our stories. Oh, this happened this week, and you can't believe what she said, and then, we're wanting him to tell us what to do. And he's like, who's talking? He throws you off. Who, look, turn and look. And we drop all the guests and just stop and realize there's nothing there. So, a teacher is who shows you your mind, really. And so, part of our 3 paths here is having that relationship with your teacher who can help show you who you really are, help you deepen that realization. So we have these one-on-one relationships with teachers, with mentors, we have retreats. We have some of our intensives that are intended to help loosen that. We have, for example, coming up in the fall, deconstructing the myth of self. Really looking at, this whole myth of the guest that's there and seeing what's really actually not there. So those are ways of seeing clearly and starting to touch into that experience of being the host. Because the awareness is what we are, and we want to begin to see that. At the same time, even as we start to have some of these glimpses and these experiences of just the mind at ease that's open, that feels like everything's perfect, no matter what's going on. It's really a wonderful way to live, place to live from. there's still this whirl of ego that keeps coming back. It's like a cyclone that just keeps coming in and docking occasionally. So we do have to also practice to continue to unloosen those bounds of self. And over time, it will loosen, but it takes some specific practice to do that. You know, one thing we focus on here, and I think you'll see more classes starting later this year on this, because I think this is so important for everyone who comes to a spiritual path. We have what's called the 4 thoughts, these 4 thoughts or 4 truths that kind of turn your mind towards the host. And that is understanding impermanence, understanding, cause and effect, understanding that all these guests that we chase after, and sometimes the guests come up as like status or fame or praise or success or pleasure, that all of those are guests that they're nice to have. Sure, I'd rather have a pleasant guest than an unpleasant guest. But when we chase after them, they don't stay. They fall apart. Everything changes. So we learn teachings like these 4 thoughts that show us what's the reality of the world. Sometimes our view just isn't skillful. We don't see life the way it really is. And so making this shift and letting go of self, we start to, as we move down these Dharma paths that we have here and elsewhere in Buddhism, we begin to develop what the Buddha called right view. We start to see the world the way it really is. And then another big piece, and really kind of the last one I wanted just to mention in the identification with the guest, is emotional healing. And again at FCM, our 3 paths are mindful living, which is stabilizing the mind and doing emotional healing. The second path is Dharma path, where we're starting to get into these teachings about how do I really shift the view and live a more selfless life, which is a very happy life. And then there's the wisdom path, where we're really much more deeply understanding who we are and who we're not. But this first mindful living path is really important, and particularly what we call emotional healing. Because if we try to bypass that, like, oh, I am sick of being an anxious person, so I'm going to go to this Buddhist community and I'm going to meditate and I'm just going to walk around it. And then I'm not going to deal with it anymore, right? That doesn't work. That's called that's called spiritual bypassing. You may have heard that term. And it'll just keep coming up. It's like the guest that will not leave. And for some of us, we may have some almost all of us have some emotional wounds from the past. As long as we live from a place of identifying with the guest, we're kind of living from a place of ego or self. There's always going to be a feeling of not good enough when we live from the ego. And for some of us, it may be a slight feeling of not good enough, but because the ego isn't real and it's always trying to make itself feel like it's something, it's always wanting more praise, more success, more wealth, more something that shows it's good enough, or it wants to get rid of something. There may be others who really, from childhood, had serious psychological, physical, other types of abuse that could have created just a much deeper emotional wound. And those are harder to shake. Sometimes those are quite buried. We call them the inner child sometimes. These parts of us that we don't even want to take out of the closet. Maybe there's some deep shame that came up at some point when we were young. And we've developed all types of strategies to not feel that shame. So perfectionism, avoidance, maybe addictions of different types, all kinds of ways to distract ourselves. So, we have emotional healing intensives here, and we have one starting in the fall, which is a wonderful way to sit back and really, we need to kind of peel this back with mindfulness and realize, are there guests that I'm not even seeing who are really wreaking havoc in my inn, that I'm basing all my relationships, maybe unknowingly, on my experience with these guests, and that are creating a lot of suffering in my life. And so within the context of a spiritual community, we have Buddhist teachings and Buddhist psychology that can be really helpful for those types of guests. And sometimes we need more help. We may need therapy. We may need someone to work with us very specifically. But in any event, we want to take care of, our emotional life in a wise way and in a caring way. So this spiritual path, again, it's about turning on the lights, calming the mind, beginning to realize we've been identified with the guest, not the host, starting to rest, learning to rest as this awareness, and then taking care of the guests that need to be taken care of. And, even as we move along the spiritual path, it doesn't mean that the guests go away. It doesn't mean that we'll never be angry or sad or frustrated. We are human beings, we have emotions. But it means we're not defined by our emotions. They'll move through us much more quickly when we're not identified with them as who we are. So, and we're still subject to sickness, old age, and death. It doesn't change what's happening in the world. It doesn't change the fact that there are wars, that there is climate crisis going on. So we still can be engaged in the world, care about the world, sometimes distraught by the world, but we don't let it define who we are. There's a very different tone that when you are living from the host, you'll feel it more. When we're living through our guest, through our identification with the guest, there's a feeling oftentimes of separation, of opposition, of resistance to the world. When we live as the host, there's a feeling of love, of oneness, of compassion, of acceptance of whatever's there. So, we'll know we're making progress on the path when the heart starts to open, when we don't see people as necessarily friend or foe, but we really just kind of open up to everything that appears in our life with a much greater sense of love and compassion. So let me stop and just ask for questions or comments or anything that's coming up for you right now from this talk of hosting guests. Yes, and we have a microphone, and that's very convenient. You're right next to the microphone. And please tell us your name.
Hi, I'm Anna, and I have a little bit of fear about sharing this, a guest popping in. So even after years of practice and being aware of awareness, of course not all the time,
Mm-hmm.
the guest that creeps in for me, and it seems to be when it's like maybe a challenge is happening in life or something, is fear around whether or not that awareness that I am will discontinue when the body dies. So if the awareness is the host and the thoughts and the body and the roles and all the things are temporary, is awareness temporary too? Or that's what creeps in, and I just wanted to put that out there, and then also maybe ask what your understanding is, or the Buddhist teaching on that.
Yeah, thank you for that. Well, that's certainly a very deep question, about awareness, and it's interesting. There's so many articles being written today from the scientific perspective. What is awareness? Does awareness continue? Is it coming from the body, or does the body come from awareness? In the Hindu tradition, there's the idea of the soul that continues, and that's different than in Buddhism. Buddhism, there's no me or soul that's thought to continue, but the teachings from the Buddha are that awareness, consciousness does continue. We call it rebirth, as you know, into future lifetimes. And particularly, there are teachings in Buddhist psychology, the Yogacara, that teach about the imprints that the guests are leaving on the mind all the time. And so these energetic imprints in Buddhist psychology are thought to leave imprints with awareness that do continue into some other form after the body dies. It's seen as a continuation of consciousness, but not as a you or a me per se, but as this awareness that then moves into some other form. And so there's so much emphasis on, taking care of what we call in the storehouse consciousness, taking care of what's in the mind, having a wholesome mind, taking care of suffering, so that what does move through to another lifetime is wholesome and the basis for more awakening in whatever form that is. Now, is there any proof of that? We have, what the Buddha taught. The Buddha on his night of awakening said he remembered all his past lifetimes. He could see all his causes and conditions back hundreds and hundreds of lifetimes, and he could see everyone else's too. Have I met anyone in this lifetime who's had that? No. So I can only, it's really kind of philosophical to have the conversation right now. We can certainly see that in this lifetime, there's that continuity of awareness, and that awareness is always there. And so all I can do is just live my life the best way possible and let go kind of, I guess, of what happens after this physical body dies. I don't really know. But I seem to have, for whatever reason in my heart, I seem to have some faith that it does, because I've been at the bedside of people who've passed, and it's felt very important to me that they pass with a mind that's peaceful and loving. But could I, show you anything to support that other than just my sense? No. Thank you. Other questions or comments from anything not clear about the host and the guest and how we might practice? This really is our path. There's so many teachings out there, right? But it's important to go back and focus on, what are we trying to do here, right? That's what motivates our practice. I don't want to continue with the suffering of the guest. I don't want to continue to be led around by the nose by the guests that keep showing up, right? Yes, in the back. Can you take that? We have people on Zoom, so we just use the microphone so they can hear as well.
Hi, my name is Paul, and my question is the host inherently calm, and all one needs to do is see the guests as guests, or must there be another way to cultivate calmness in the host? Meaning, is being calm the absence of attachment to guests or being led by guests, or what is it?
Yeah, so the host, oftentimes when we're beginning this practice, there's still a self even kind of thinking I'm being calm. So noticing that there's an I there. When truly we're relaxed as the host, as the awareness, it is calm, it is still, and it's something, when you touch it deeply, you'll know it. It's a feeling that cannot be perturbed, cannot be agitated. It's not a place that most of us dwell. Very quickly we go back into the self, but we can understand it intellectually, practice coming back to it, and also continue to practice training the mind to not be following the guest. So, earlier in practice, we are using concentration to calm the guest down. And, we're probably not really in that place of just awareness that is still, silent, aware. We're moving closer to it, but there's still a sense that there's a me here doing something. But we can start loosening, we can start seeing through the guest, loosening the attachment to them, calming them down, but we're sort of calming them down using our thoughts. We're using the guest of mindfulness, the guest of meditation. We're using the wholesome qualities of mind. But then we also continue to cultivate that stillness. And this is why I think retreat is so helpful, to actually get to that point where the mind can touch that stillness. Comes oftentimes from a very deep place. But it's there, it's accessible, and many people in this community have had glimpses. And oftentimes, again, it can close up pretty quickly. You can come out of retreat, with just this sort of retreat bliss, and then all of a sudden you probably know from your experience that then we get caught up with the guest again. So we have to remind ourselves over and over again. But it's not that we get to this all of a sudden. It may happen occasionally for people. You hear about people like Byron Katie, who just had this experience where she just kind of woke up and all of a sudden, or Eckhart Tolle's another one, and then everything was different. And they didn't shift back. But most people in a spiritual practice find that they'll have these glimpses, they'll have these moments of touching that place, and then it kind of closes back up. But we're trying to cultivate through practice more and more of these moments of being awake and less moments of following the guest. So it's a more progressive path for.
It is considered our natural state.
It is considered our natural mind, yes. It's just we are so conditioned to going to thought, to leaving it, to identifying with the guest, that it's a path back to letting go of that, unspooling this ego, this attachment to the ego, and resting in that natural mind. So it sounds like if it's natural, it should be easy, but we've conditioned the mind. We're taught that the Buddha taught it. We do what we give attention to persists, and then science tells us. The more the brain focuses on something in particular, the closer the synapses get together, the more readily your mind goes to this thought, this reaction. So we have to practice not automatically going to these reactive patterns. We have to practice coming back, relaxing the mind, if we're going to sort of undo that wiring that's been done. Question right in front of you, and then we need to end.
My name is David, and the way I've experienced this is that I don't think there's too much I can do to actually create peace and calm,
Right.
per se. But yet when I am aware and I allow things to be just as they are without trying to change them, and when I'm also in my body, that the peace and calm seems to well up from the inside.
Yes.
It's not something that I can create.
Right.
And so that's how I've experienced it.
Yeah, thank you, David. Yeah, we don't make the natural mind just is, and we don't have to do something to make awareness be present. We simply are aware. However, when we start this path, the mind is so busy with thought, we do need to do some training to get some level of stability of mind to be able to then access this natural mind. So let me just, no talk on hosting guests would be complete without sharing the poem from Rumi called The Guest House. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice. Meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whatever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. So thank you.
Thank you, Angie. Very useful talk. Just a couple words about tea. We will have tea online, virtual tea, so if you'd like to grab a refreshment, please do so, and then you'll be put into rooms and you can talk about, the talk today, your experience with the subject, and get to know each other a little bit as an online community. For those of you in the hall, we will be having tea outside on the lanai. It is shaded and there are fans, so it'll be relatively comfortable. The second thing I'd like to share with you is this idea of dana. In the Pali language, dana simply means generosity. It's a practice that we try to cultivate to open our hearts. And you can express your generosity several ways. There's a bowl there to the left of the door as you exit. It's a monk's bowl. If you happen to carry cash or checks, you can deposit them there. There's a more modern method in the hallway on the bulletin board, a QR code. You just point your phone to that. That'll take you directly to our website. Or you can also donate online. There's a donate button on our, and I think Bill's going to put that online too, right? Did I have that right? There's a donate button, yeah. FloridaMindfulness.org/donate. I believe that's it. Did I cover everything? All right, so at the next bell, let's stretch, massage as needed. The next bell will stand. The first bell, we bow to the Buddha in recognition of this capacity that is within all of us to lead a life of awakening. And then here in the hall, we turn towards the center, also thinking of our friends online, and we bow to one another to express our gratitude for the support that we're showing each other as we journey along this path. And finally, I'd like to dedicate the merit. May any benefit generated by our practice together this morning be shared equally with all whom we encounter, whether near or far away. And may its effects ripple continuously to aid in the healing and the transformation of our world. Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon, and please join us for tea online or in person.
Hello, everybody. I'm Faye. I'll be the host today for the virtual tea. So let's wait and see who's coming and who's going, and then we can begin to share.
Faye. Faye.
Yeah.
Hi, Faye. I'm I'm bowing in just to say hi to your sweet face. I can't stay, but I just wanted to connect and say hi and thank you for being here.
Yeah. I saw your name on the Zoom and I'm like, I haven't seen her for a while. Nice to know she's here. So thanks for coming.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, this is Beatrice bowing in, and I
Yes,
can't stay either. I apologize. I
that's
just drove
okay.
over. I just drove over to FCM, and I'm going to go to in-person tea. So I'll bow out. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. We will see you. Yeah, I hear that it's hot over there in the in-person Florida world. So maybe we're more comfortable here, but that's okay. It's nice to be a baby and just sit there in your diaper and and chill out, I guess. Yeah.
And this is Kenny bowing in from the city of New York.
Oh.
Yeah, on the Upper West Side. So
Mm-mm-mm.
I don't know how long I'll be with you either because one of my uncles who passed away, Uncle Denny, loved the Church of St. John Divine Cathedral
Uh-huh.
on the
Yes.
Upper West Side. So I hadn't been here in a long time, if ever. So to honor him, I'm almost there now. So I'll keep listening for as long as I can. But if there's a service or something, I might just
Yeah.
cut out and do my thing. But
Yeah.
it is
Okay.
actually pretty cool. Yeah, that's part of it.
Yeah.
Anyhow,
It's
so
beautiful. Yeah. So much space in that church, huh?
yeah, I guess
Yeah.
so. I'll find out soon enough. So
Oh, okay.
yeah, I'll stay on as long as I can. But the reality is, I think I'll end up having to vacate to be more present here. So
Right. Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
but it's good seeing everybody.
Yes, good to see you too. Okay, so about the talk, of course, I love um to hear Angie's way of helping us to come into contact with that, so much space like um like in the church, but in the outside, in the sky, everywhere. I also love Rumi's poem and how he says whatever comes, meet them at the door laughing. I just love that because it's not like everything that goes through the mind is fun or funny, but it's just that um the mind is throwing up all these strange and wonderful or strange and horrible things, but it's not um I don't have to take them seriously. I don't have to believe what's going through there. Yeah, I meet them at the door laughing just because I know that they won't stay. So yeah, that's my takeaway, I think, for today from the talk. Does somebody else have something they wanna share?
Yeah, I thought it was a wonderful teaching. I really enjoyed it. I love the whole analogy of the innkeeper. And I'd not really heard that before. I think that was great. And the idea of greeting these unexpected guests that we have because it shows a posture of non-resistance. And even these so-called seemingly negative things have something to teach us. And so it was a very, very good talk, and I enjoyed it immensely. Thank you.
It's Chris bowing in. I'm happy to be here, Faye. And I don't think I know Al and Eddie. It's probably been many months, close to a year, since I've been on T. But like parenting, getting lunch on the table, and everything else often stands in the way. But she's being very patient today, allowing me to be here. So I'm very happy to be here. And yeah, I really liked the talk. I'm gonna continue on the same theme next week. I'll be in Tampa giving the talk next Sunday. So I don't want to get too many spoilers away, but we'll continue this theme that Angie has started for us next week. And yeah, wow.
Edith going in. But I get tired sometimes, so I just try not to pay any attention to the voices in my head. I just, yeah, one of my favorite things these days is blow it off, because so many of them are just unimportant and unrelated. The ones that get to me are and have been just having to go back over. I get drawn into the past, but there was some unfinished business there. So I had a lot of time that I spent reconstructing my relationships with my family. They're gone. So I had a lot of things to say that I never did. I was quiet and withdrawn, and I was angry. And so I had to go through all that as I started the trainings and, got into the meditation. I had to go into that. I like what I heard about you can change the past in the present, and the future's made of present moments. So if you're staying in the present, and it gave me a way to try to embrace those feelings. I didn't always do it comfortably. Sometimes I was just in my head saying things that made me very uncomfortable, but then I'd let it go and they finally stopped happening. And a couple of years, I would say, but I haven't had them lately. I'm not sure if they'll come back, but hopefully if they do, I'll be even more gentle. I know that I came to the awareness this morning, and I have to text my sister because last night I was explaining something negative about that. And I would tell her that I am now, I think that what happened after I did all that, I'm aware of the fact that they were suffering. I can finally have some kind of, I guess, a dialogue with my parents, even though they're gone. I feel their presence and they're welcome. And what they were telling me is we were a mess. My dad drank, okay. My mom had to live with it, okay. So finally, I'm the light at the end of the tunnel. They were suffering too. They never said they were going to, they were perfect. They did so much for us. And how can I even blame them for all of these ugly conversations or things that they did, even if they were really bad? Because that's what happens. That's my story. And that's what a story, it changes. So I blow it off. I mean, it's just another story in the end. The emotions are what I'm working, that I'm concerned about, because there's no correct story. It's always just my little thread of what happened. So I don't believe any of my stories. And I don't want to identify myself because I feel like I'm changing. So I don't really want to form an identity right now. And a lot of those thoughts tend to go by the way. Also, my life is changing. I've lost my health in the past 4 years to the extent where everything is different. And I don't have a job. I don't work. And so, life changes, and I'm trying to, let's say, reform as I go along, and I'm just getting rid of a lot of stuff. So these days, when there's this stuff going on, I let it run through, but I'm just officially, I'm not interested in trying to process every thought that comes into my head or take every thought that comes into my head seriously. I have meditation times to see what, is important. And I had some paperwork that was important to fill out, and I get upset, but I called my neighbor and he assured me that I had done all I can, which is true. But sometimes I have to be reminded, and worse yet, I have to wait and see,
Right.
So all of those thoughts can go. I'm done. So I think I'm trying to organize a little bit. What's important to hold on to? And if I don't think it's important, then not right now. And I used to be, if I came into my head, I wouldn't stop until I was finished with it. If I start a project, I don't stop until I'm finished with it, even when it would be in my best interest to put it down for a little while. So I'm looking at those things, that kind of a compulsion to have an energy that used to serve me, but really doesn't. And she talked about the ego. I don't think there's any real use for it. I think it's an outdated warning system that people don't need, and it leads to a lot of delusion. I think that the Buddha said that 99, or was it Thai, 99% of our perceptions are wrong. So why pay a lot of attention, to those? The important ones seem to stick. The important ones have to do with tasks that I have to do. I have to show up for this. Relationships, I'm not good at, but that's part of the reforming. And I was in touch with a friend, and I was happy to be in touch with her. I walked away for a little while, and it looks like she's going to be joining FCM. She went with me yesterday to the work day, and I enjoyed that. And so, since everything is always in flux, I try to stay in that fluctuation, but without getting battered around, just to leave most of my thoughts alone. I'd say in my lifetime, about 98% of the thoughts I thought never needed to be thought. And they weren't significant. And they were just, in that sense, a waste of time. So I wanted to be able to discriminate. I think that's what she was talking about. And say, not important, not important, or not important right now, and not have to follow every little thought. I don't think that my thoughts are that valid right now. So until things continue to settle down, I dismiss almost everything, I think. Bowing out.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Um, what you've all said reminds me of a couple things. One is, one is just that it's wonderful to have somebody like Angie sharing on this, because I know from hearing other talks that she gives and things that she's said about her own experience, that she really knows what it's like to lay down the concerns about who am I and how are people seeing me and what do I have to do next, and just to meet things as they come, right? And so I just love to hear her talk about it. Yeah, and I've heard people say too, you know, with all the thoughts that come through, the ones that we don't really need to think. I can treat it as if it's somebody in another room is listening to a radio program on a subject that I'm really not interested in, and I can just, you know, like it's happening. The sound is going on somewhere, but don't have to care about it. Yeah, yeah. And one more image that a friend gave me recently. He was trying to clean up his backyard and put in like new dirt and stuff, and he realized, oh, there's this post in the middle of the backyard. Probably it was like, you know, somebody was trying to have a laundry line or something, and he's like, oh, I'm going to dig that post out and then I'll have a nice flat lawn. And he started digging, and he realized it was set in there with concrete, but he thought, oh, I can do this, you know, it's not going to be that deep. He ended up digging for probably 4 hours, and it was like about 4 foot deep, this chunk of concrete, but he couldn't stop because he had started, right? And sometimes, like people said, you know, we're like that. All of a sudden we get stuck in this thought or this mode of perceiving a problem or something, and we just can't stop. And yeah, so sometimes if I get started on something, I'll kind of look and think, you know, is this really worth it? And am I digging out something that maybe even didn't need to come out in the first place, right? Maybe it was fine the way it is, but can't let it alone. So that's another one of those meet it at the door laughing, I guess. So yeah, bowing out. We see Bodhi. He is here with us. Hi, Bodhi.
You say hello?
Hello.
Hello, hello. Good to see you.
Can you wave?
Thank you all.
Thank you, Al. Thanks for being here. Okay.
Penny Yin. I was just gonna say, you know, even with New York, city with all the honking that always goes on, especially in the congested intersections, um, those are guests too, you know, and like you were saying, Faye, it's interesting how I got very quickly to tune out the honking. But did I really tune it out, or did I honor the guests, in this case, the honking, and the blaring and the people swearing and talking and laughing and loving and all that kind of stuff? Because I honored them as guests for what they were, you know. So, and it's interesting too because I'll turn this around. Speaking of doors, what now? Yeah, I'm blur this side. So speaking of doors, these are the church doors at the cathedral, right? And so they have all these symbols and stuff. So then I was thinking, if these symbols are portals and the doorway is a choice, how we approach what comes to and enters our doorways. That was just a kind of profound thought I had, you know. So we're actually filtering our lives and perceptions through all these symbols and signs and more of our doorways. So anyhow, just something that kind of came to mind randomly. That's kind of cool stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
In other words, sorry, do we come to the door? Do we perceive stuff as a king or queen? Do we have wonder or not wonder? You know, those kind of things, you know.
Thanks, Chris Bowden. I gotta go get these guests some.
Okay, well, it's good to be with everybody. Thank you for coming and hope to see you again, okay?
Thank you.
Okay, take care, everybody.
Take care.